Final Fantasy XIV is not the game you think it is. Maybe you're a well-established player, or a former player, or maybe you've been watching from afar as your favorite content creators slowly migrate, making their way through the emotional minefield that is this game's story, desperately yet patiently waiting for them to realize the same thing as you. Game bad. Omega lol. Well, fellow human, this video is for you. Or just some of you. Or all of you. No, let's just watch the video. Okay, before we dive in, let me give you a little bit of context for why I'm making this video. I absolutely love Final Fantasy XIV. I've played through the entirety of the game as of patch 5.55, and I've completed all of the story content the game has to offer. I can't stress enough just how emotionally invested I am in the story and its characters. But it wasn't always that way. I tried and quit Final Fantasy XIV 2 times over the last 6 years. I tried once during Heavensward, its first expansion, award-winning and included in the free trial, by the way, and then again in Stormblood, just before Shadowbringers launched. Some parts of the game changed, but the reason that I quit was still the same. A Realm Reborn's main f***ing story quests. The combat was adequate, albeit a bit slower than I was used to. Some of the boss fights were honestly pretty awesome, but I just couldn't sit through the endless hours of mandatory text dialogue and cutscenes. They would go on and on, regaling me with tales of primals and beast tribes. My friends would tell me, "Bro, you just gotta hold out, bro. It gets good, so good, bro. Please, bro, you gotta pay attention, bro. I'll suck your..." Dude, stop. I don't have the patience for that. I love stories in games. I'm a huge Dungeons & Dragons nerd. I'm a proper whore for lore. But in the end, I just couldn't stomach it. Or at least I couldn't, until I could. I decided to give the game another shot in May of the second Umbral era, COVID 2021, and I told myself that since a bunch of my friends had recently started playing, I would give it another shot, seeing as it was free to play up until level 60. I mean, what else could I do with all that free time? Go outside? And it was cool, I guess. It was nice to be able to connect with all these friends again, but still, always in the back of my mind, and in the top left of my screen, it whispered, "Do me." I honestly struggled to do it, and I would spend weeks making no progress while everyone around me soared onwards towards the great beyond, the promised land, Heavensward. But I did not give in. Neck deep in political strife and betrayal did I stride, until before the gates of Ishgard, I came. I had made it, and I was forced to accept an uncomfortable truth. That my friends could be right. And by following the Yellow Box Road, I was growing to love this world, its characters, and its bold storytelling. From there, it wasn't quite smooth sailing, but I at least had come to accept that this game had value beyond the generic staples of MMO design that tickled just the right parts of my monkey mind. I was in. But even then, I honestly had no clue as to the ride I had strapped in for. But that's enough of that. Let's get in to the good shit. The ARR smack talk. I mean, I jest. Partially. A Realm Reborn, even for its time, was curious. It was an MMORPG, a game in a genre not typically known for its quality storytelling. But it was also a Final Fantasy game, and anyone who has spent any amount of considerable time playing an entry in the franchise knows that when you boot up, you best hook up that catheter. Look, the games love their cutscenes, and 14 is no different in that regard. That's a hard sell for some people, especially veteran MMO gamers who aren't exactly known for their, let's call it, patience. The presentation holds up pretty well for a game that's almost a decade old, but the narrative and script often feel more 1613 than 2013. The dialogue frequently reads like a Shakespearean tragedy, and is bloated by an absolutely absurd amount of self-filleting lore dumps that would make even George R.R. Martin blush. It's fucking rad, but it's not well adjusted to a Tolkien-era audience that probably left 59 seconds into this video because I didn't look like this. Or this. It's too literary for most people, and sometimes I caught myself wondering how much my time was being valued. Okay. Before you press enter on that white-hot, parasocial-infused comment down below, remember that you are definitely not in a cult, and I promise this is going somewhere. I really do love this game, like, a lot. And having played through the entire story as it currently exists, I recognize in retrospect how important all of that stuff was. Truthfully, I am so grateful for the attention to detail in A Realm Reborn's writing, because it provides a rock-solid foundation upon which the more emotionally driven tales can be told. But that doesn't mean it's a good introduction to the game. In fact, I'd go so far as to say it's a poor representation of the game as a whole. Just to clarify, not bad. Just not a good representation of the larger game. Story aside, the gameplay in Final Fantasy XIV is slower than what most people have come to associate with the modern MMO. While the majority of other games in the genre have taken it upon themselves to compete over who can fuck up my wrists the fastest, 14 has, for the most part, maintained its more methodical approach to combat. As you level, you get more skills to add to your rotation, and depending on what job or class you're playing, you might rack up a good number of them that can be used outside of the typical 2.5 second global cooldown window. But getting there takes a lot of time in which most people will have made up their minds about how engaging they feel the game is, mechanically at least. I played a black mage during my time in ARR, and I hated it. If I wanted to cast the same two spells over and over again, giving me more than enough time to contemplate the poor life choices that led me to that point, I'd play something else. Like New World. But as soon as I switched to Red Mage, which essentially allows you to instantly throw out a spell between each hardcast, I was thriving. It's not that Black Mage is bad, and you should feel bad for liking it. The job is actually so highly regarded within the community that pretty much anyone who even claims to play it is appointed the formal title of Giga Chad. But even then, most people will agree that it's just not a good representation of the game's combat up until level 50. There are some other issues with the onboarding process, like the web services being an absolute nightmare to navigate, and the UI being a bit intimidating at first. But I don't really want to talk about those things, because they're boring. So, if you've made it this far, thank you very, very much for bearing with me, especially those of you who, like myself, are massive fans of the game. Not a cult. We've arrived at the part of the video where I try to actually sell this experience, in spite of all those things I've just said. And some things I still have to say. Sorry. Final Fantasy XIV isn't the game you think it is. If you stopped playing in ARR for the same reasons that I did, or are putting off trying it entirely by similar complaints that you've heard, I understand. It is perfectly reasonable to decide that this experience is insurmountable to you. You shouldn't feel like you need to invest upwards of 50 hours just to get to the good stuff, even if it's free. Even if the community screams that it gets better and that you won't regret it. That's not enough of an incentive for some people. They need to feel that themselves. However, if it is, You will be graced with one of the most ambitious, epic, and emotionally rich stories that the entirety of gaming has to offer. It has immense scope, weight, and consequences, leaving your heartstrings twisted and disfigured beyond recognition. You see, Final Fantasy isn't one of those games in the genre that you slowly learn to hate more and more because it hurts for you to continue to play it.
And broken promises.
It's one of those games that you learn to love because of how much it continues to hurt your feelings while you play.
Dude, this game knows how to make me f***ing cry. I've cried like 5 times.
There's friendship, found family, love, loss, guilt, sacrifice, and most importantly, despite all of that, hope. It is one of the grandest adventures that I have ever experienced, and it just keeps getting better. I am legitimately so damn excited to see how the current story, almost a decade in the making, comes to a close. However, if you're anything like me and you struggled to sit through ARR, you really don't have a good sense of any of that. So what changed? Well, for one, the lead writers. What we get at the beginning is a well-written, albeit off-pace tale of political intrigue and subterfuge. There's a lot to praise in the early content, don't get me wrong, but the incredible character moments and plot twists at times feel drowned out by the 15-minute monologues and info dumps. It's meticulously written to a fault. Maybe it's because of the disaster that was the original game, but there are moments that scream of a desperation for validation.
Things are different now, we promise. We're a real fantasy game. Please, come back!
It takes a bit of time to hit its stride. Again, 10-year-old game struggling under the weight of its initial failures. But holy hell, does it have momentum once it does. As the game reaches maturity in its later installments, the story moves away from its bookish roots and flourishes into something much more cinematic, an approach that we've become accustomed to in modern gaming. On top of that, it doubles down on the much more accessible approach of telling the majority of the story through the experience of its characters, instead of forcing you to sit through hours of exposition. A Realm Reborn has a bad habit of telling you why something is important, while expansions like Shadowbringers show you why it's important to the people you've come to care about. It's a completely different experience. I care a lot more about what happened to my second husbando 3 years ago, and how that changed him as a person, than I care about what happened during a war that I wasn't a part of. And I care more about how a lost civilization directly affects a dear friend than how said civilization affected current technology. Those things that I care less about are still super important. I just don't need the game spending a disproportionate amount of time on them. I was so fucking happy to see this change in direction, and I felt it. It was tangible. I am here to tell you, as a former skeptic, that despite all of the legitimate criticisms someone might have of the game, especially regarding ARR, the payoff is immense. I am so grateful for my friends who encouraged me to stick with it. What you get is a game that is made with love by developers who are also fans and active players of the game. You get an absolute ton of content, both old and new, that stays impressively relevant and doesn't exist purely as a series of hurdles you need to overcome just to get to the part of the game that everyone's actually playing. That's really unusual for the genre, and it was such a refreshing change of pace. The casual and collector content is vast and varied. There's theme park rides, jumping puzzles, card games, mini games, treasure hunting. The list is so damn long, dude. Oh, and did I mention deeply customizable housing? Yeah, it has that too. On the other end of the spectrum, the super hardcore content is also incredibly well designed and compelling. Estimates claim that less than 4% of characters across all regions of Final Fantasy XIV have cleared the hardest content that the latest expansion has to offer, the Epic of Alexander Ultimate. It might be incredibly tough content, but talk to anybody who's cleared it and they'll tell you that it's fair. There's just so much on offer in this game that it's almost overwhelming. So, my advice for people engaging or re-engaging with 14 is this. It's actually not to rush through the first part of the game just because what comes later is better. I know that some of the things that I've said in this video might suggest that I think that's a good idea. Unless you're just completely uninterested in stories in general, then don't. I think you should take your time. Unlike most other modern MMOs, this is not a race to the finish line. A huge part of FF14's value, at least for somebody like me, is actually in the journey. And that's not a cop-out. There's plenty to do when you get to that level cap. All of those things I've been complaining about are free. So what's the rush? ARR might be a bit of a slog, yes. But you also get a decent taste of what's to come in Heavensward, which is also included in the trial. Try out different jobs to see what pace of combat best suits you, because it varies a lot between them. Read the story, but go in with the right expectations. Go in with the knowledge that A Realm Reborn lays a solid foundation of lore that the story builds upon, but it's not an accurate representation of the story as a whole. Not even close. A Realm Reborn is, in a lot of ways, a story about a place, while the following expansions are a lot more about its people. When fans of the game take to their socials to rant, rave, and defend the story of 14, they aren't talking about ARR. They are talking about something much grander in scale that not only builds over the course of the expansions, but also dramatically improves in its delivery over time. 14 is a game that has learned so much and is infinitely better for it. It's a damn shame that you don't get a good sense of that from the get-go, but maybe that will change. Final Fantasy XIV is not what you think it is. It is not the perfect game created by perfect developers like some people would have you believe, but it's also not the fundamentally flawed games that others would have you believe either. Regardless of which side you find yourself leaning more towards, I can tell you one thing absolutely. Final Fantasy XIV is not A Realm Reborn. Not anymore. Okay, that's the video, I guess. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate both your time and your attention. If you liked the video, please hit that like button because this is a new style of content for me, so it really lets me know that this is the kind of thing that you would like to see in the future. On the flip side, if you didn't like it, please tell me why. The feedback is really important moving forward, so it's cool. If you decide you would like to see more from me, then you can maybe hit that subscribe button so you know when my future videos go live. Maybe even that notification bell too to know more immediately. Otherwise, you can find me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/Hecit. We're pretty chill, we'd love to have you. But that's it from me. Take care of yourself. See ya.